Welcome to this special edition of Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. My name is Victoria Bert, and I'm the producer of this show. The murder of a Black man in Minneapolis, Minnesota by a white police officer sparked protests and upheaval around this country and around the world. Today on this edition of Represent NYC, we're going to be discussing the politics of protest and starting conversations about racism and police brutality. Joining us now is Dr. Christina Greer, the host of the election show on MNN, as well as an associate professor of political science at Fordham University. Dr. Christina Greer, good to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks so much for having me.
You've hosted this show many times, so the positions are reversed a little bit, but I want to ask you some questions. And tell me, can popular protests like this really affect social change?
Absolutely. I mean, the only time Black folks in this country have ever gotten anything substantive is because protest politics led to electoral politics and policy changes. Sadly, this country has a long history of, when people in marginalized communities ask for things and talk about how we've been ostracized and don't have equal resources and how we've been removed from equal processes of justice, they fall on deaf ears. We saw with Colin Kaepernick kneeling quietly on the sidelines, that was too much protest. And lots of people didn't want to hear just the basic demand of being treated with dignity and highlighting the issues of police brutality. Folks made it all about respecting or disrespecting the flag. And so sadly, now folks are saying, oh, it's too much. Why are people protesting in the streets? It's like, well, all the other avenues have been exhausted. And now, you were forced to see people, you were forced to hear people, you were forced to possibly view their pain if you're capable of that. But we've already seen slowly but surely protest politics is leading to elected officials recognizing they're going to have to change how they think about policing. We saw this in 2014 with Ferguson, when people took to the streets. The government responded with tanks and military, police in military grade artillery. However, we've seen the city council completely be restructured. Just 2 days ago, the first Black woman was elected mayor of Ferguson, and we've seen a lot of policy changes in the police department. So sadly, people have to take to the streets and protest, and sometimes uprisings occur, but that's the voice of the unheard. And now, finally, Black people and Latinx communities and marginalized folks are being heard.
I read an article that you wrote in the Amsterdam News where you said, I won't call them riots. Tell me why.
Well, riots, I always think of, what boys do after they win or lose the big football game. These are spontaneous, moments of destruction where people are, we've seen this, and if you're an Eagles fan, you've seen people tear down the city. I call them uprisings because uprisings have a historical context to them. They have a real root, and they have a root in being unheard. And being unsatisfied with inequities that people see across every aspect of their life. And so these uprisings have been a long time coming. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. People have taken to the streets because we're seeing disproportionate deaths in the Black community. We have 40 million people who have filed for unemployment. We know those are disproportionately people of color. We know that a lot of Black and Latinx people even have jobs that aren't even eligible for unemployment. And we see that Black and Latinx people are on the front lines of caring for folks affected by COVID. And then on top of all of that, the unemployment, the housing crisis, the dying of COVID, the illnesses of COVID, and not having enough protections if you're working in sectors because of COVID. On top of that, we still have police officers killing innocent people, Black men and women and children, on a pretty regular and consistent basis with hardly any repercussions from higher electeds. So, I mean, if we think about the context of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, he was murdered 2 months ago, over 2 months ago. The only reason why we know his name is because activists spent weeks and weeks on the ground making sure that justice was served. Breonna Taylor, shot in her own home. She was an EMT. She's a colleague of police officers, completely innocent. Her boyfriend held, questioned, and finally released, right? As a suspect, even though the police are the ones who came into her home and murdered an innocent woman as a mistake. And then we have on camera George Floyd, yet another Black man killed on camera by an illegal act from a police officer. And those police officers were still going to work, they were still collecting a paycheck. It wasn't until people took to the streets to demand justice that not only were they fired, but then they were indicted
Yes.
for what they've done. And these are 4 police officers, right? These are people who stood by and watched an innocent man call out for his mother as they had an illegal process of kneeling on his neck and asphyxiating him, as the coroner reported. So, and I think also part of this frustration is, so many Black people have seen when we are murdered on camera by the state, by people whose taxes, we pay taxes to pay their salaries, they'll dig up any old, transcript from high school or parking ticket or any way to justify murdering this. And we've seen, some white allies have finally said, wait a minute, I punched a cop, right? We've got videos of folks just not wanting to wear a mask, pushing a cop into a river, laughing about it, and the cop just shakes off the water and walks away. So we've seen time and time again how justice is deployed unequally for Black and Latinx communities versus white communities. And it's just reached a boiling point, and there are some white allies who get it. There's some white Americans who want to get it and are going about it in the wrong ways that are not helpful when it comes to some of these protests and marches. But I mean, we're at a precipice where the backdrop is also a white nationalist president who's calling protesters thugs, who has a real vision of America that does not include people who look like me. But his rhetoric is, he'll send an empty tweet saying, oh, this is a sad day for the Floyd family. However, we know that he is absolutely incapable of having compassion, but he's also absolutely incapable of thinking about his role as an executive to unite the nation. And he likes these big displays of military pomp and circumstance and power, but it's only destroying the fabric and any progress that's being made in these protests.
Well, we also see him use expressions like, if there's looting, there's shooting, which to me feels very code-like.
Well, it's not a code. I mean, it's a historical reference. It's not even dog whistle. You can look at, sort of the historical context of what he said. I mean, that's the thing. Whoever writes his speeches, everyone says, oh, the president talks off the cuff. Sometimes he does, but quite often he makes direct references to past white supremacists, white nationalists, because his supporters who actually follow those historical teachings, they know exactly what he's saying. And that's how he keeps his base of roughly 37 to 40% of Americans.
When you look at something in context, I think about when I started working in television, which was right around the time of Rodney King's brutal beating in LA and then the riots in 92. And
which I would call uprisings, but
okay, let's call them uprisings. That's, I've been brainwashed. And then I think it was 2014 with Eric Gardner, who also uttered the words, I can't breathe. It's like, we're seeing these, and the many, many, many people who have been killed in between there. And my fear is that nothing is going to change. My fear is that this is going to erupt and then just subside.
I don't feel that way because, when we had the protests for Eric Garner, they were pretty contained and they were relatively peaceful. And so people are patting themselves on the back for peaceful protests. That's not necessarily always, the best solution. When we've had isolated uprisings. So Ferguson was an isolated uprising. We've seen things in other cities for small periods of time. We have never seen I don't know if it's coordinated, but we've never seen so many cities simultaneously, not since 68. And even that summer, you saw cities popping off week to week. We never saw essentially 5 days of people, of all racial and ethnic groups saying enough is enough across the globe. Like this is a global movement. When you see people in New Zealand marching and kneeling, when you see people all over Europe, in Asia, parts of the continent of Africa, South America, I mean, this is I think it's not just about George Floyd, but I think that we have to remember, this is a backdrop of a pandemic where there are so many people who are at their wits' end and they feel failed by the local, state, and federal government. And there is no hope. And you add this on top, and it's just something has to change. And the peaceful asking for things to change has not worked. It's fallen on deaf ears. And we have your attention now, right? Mayors have to listen. They're thinking about changing how policing is structured. They're thinking about changing how police are funded, right? We're thinking about who are district attorneys. And so it's reached sort of smaller states, smaller cities. It wasn't covered on the news, right? Philadelphia was covered, but this protest was definitely covered in a more local capacity. And so you're seeing people who haven't protested either ever or in quite some time saying, I actually need to be a part of this. Like, this is my history that's going on right now, and I can't sit on the sidelines anymore, even if I'm relatively comfortable. We know that there's something that is like awakened in people where they are just tired of living in essentially two separate countries, where some people get goods and services and are treated fairly, not just by elected officials, but by police departments, and other folks where it's like, I think some people are waking up and seeing it's like your life circumstances and your life chances look nothing like mine. And why is that? And it's actually not right. Now, how long will these allyships and these coalitions maintain? I don't know. But sometimes, for people who study social movements, sometimes there's something to be said about short-term coalitions to get what you need, and then they dissolve and they've served the purpose that they have. I'm hoping that many of these coalitions will be much longer term. But, we saw in LA, in some of the uprisings and the protests, their Black Lives Matter signs with the Mexican flag. People were really proud to say, it's like, I'm Mexican American, and obviously in a place like LA, there's some tensions between the Black and Latinx communities at times because there's a competition of this perception of scarce resources. And so I think people are really proud to say, it's like, our communities haven't always seen eye to eye. We haven't always worked together, but like, this is the time to do it. There have been some really great op-eds about Asian Americans saying, I got to talk to my parents. Like, they're Trump supporters, but like, I need them to understand this happening to Black people could and will happen to us as well. And we have to see ourselves as part of a larger collective narrative within American history and American democracy. And so I think people are slowly but surely starting to put the pieces together. None of this is new to the vast majority of Black people who have lived in this country. However, a lot of people are late to the party, but they've come to the party, finally. And I think a lot of the activists and organizers are actually accepting people into the fold, because it's in many ways, it's better late than never. And we have to change whatever system we're in, because on a local, state, and federal level, it's not sustainable.
Well, this is going to be our final question, but you're the host of the election show here on MNN, and I want to get your take on what do you think this will mean for November for Biden or for Trump?
Well, sadly, the trajectory that we're on, we are on the same express train that every other country that's lost democracy and succumbed to a dictator. That's my pessimistic view, sadly. The next step in all of this, we've seen the hyper-militarization, we've seen the lies, we've seen a president completely corrupt his party and they've become sycophants and they've completely abdicated. We've seen now our three branches of government. The judicial branch is almost solely owned by the president. We've seen one of our two branches of Congress completely owned by the president. We've seen the executive branch become this authoritarian regime. And so the next step, once you bring out the military, once you start shooting journalists with rubber bullets, once you start arresting journalists who have identified themselves as journalists, Zellner Myrie, who's my state senator in Brooklyn, wearing a fluorescent shirt that said Senator Myrie, arrested and pepper sprayed by the NYPD during a peaceful protest just because he's identifying himself. He's wearing a shirt that says I'm a senator. He's there just to observe and make sure that everyone is safe in Brooklyn. Just arrested without cause, on camera, by the way. And so these are police officers who don't really care about being videoed because they're there to control and to dominate. And so the next step is to steal an election. We've already seen hints of that in 2016, but this is, we're sadly gearing up in the midst of a global pandemic where there's going to be confusion about in-person voting versus mail by home, absentee voting. There's already going to be confusion. There's going to be defunding. This conversation about defunding the U.S. Postal Service isn't about defunding the U.S. Postal Service. It's about making sure that we have a structure that's supposed to take care of our elections if we have to do them by mail, that they are not properly resourced, right? So all of these things, if we're paying attention, the next stop is to actually have a stolen election. If this president even allows November 3rd to take place, that is my real concern.
So you think he's going to do what?
What would
that look like?
He has to, Congress wouldn't let that happen. It's like, we've seen Congress let a lot of things happen under this president's watch. We've
Right.
seen Congress let a lot of things happen in this president's watch. And there are a lot of Democrats who, some understand what is going on, but some still think that, they can work with their colleagues and they're good people. And sometimes they just say inappropriate things. I don't think that all of the Democrats fully understand the extent to which our democracy is on the precipice of failure and peril. And so you have these good meaning Democrats who are far too willing to work with the Republican Party at times when they shouldn't be. I believe in compromise and I want the two parties to work together. But we've seen that, Republicans are more than happy to take power and run with it at the president's behest. We've seen the courts completely follow the president's orders, right? There's no way that Mitch McConnell should ever say, well, I'll let you know what I think once I talk to the president. That's once the president tells me what he thinks. That's
Right.
the antithesis of what the framers intended. You can read the Federalist Papers. You can read all the debates between the framers. This is the moment we are in, and the breakdown of all three branches of government simultaneously is very concerning to me. We've had times where we've had a breakdown of a branch or two, or branch, during a moment in time, and we've been able to recover. But I think what makes this moment different from, say, the Nixon era or times of the distant past when we're a lot less diverse, right? Keep in mind, people of color have only been voting in this country for 50 years. So, all the elections, say, before Eisenhower, I don't really count them in significant ways because we didn't have robust voting from marginalized communities. But we've had one branch falter. We've never had all three branches really crumbling at the behest of one man who does not understand the three branches of government. And because he doesn't understand it, he doesn't respect it.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. Thank you for taking the time, and I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
Joining us now is Alvin Bragg, and he was the Chief Deputy Attorney General of the state of New York, the Executive Deputy Attorney General for Social Justice, and organized and served as the first chief of the special unit that investigated police-involved killings. How are you today?
I'm doing okay, all things considered. How are you doing?
I'm okay too. You've spent most of your life fighting for police accountability. And I think that it's fair to say that the relationship between Black Americans and the police is sort of a barometer for race relations in this country. And I just want to sort of really touch base with you and get your thoughts on what's been happening in the last few weeks. And really it goes back many, many, many years and decades and hundreds of years, actually. Tell me what you think is the core of the problem right now.
So, I think you put your finger on it. It goes back, many years. It's embedded in the history of the country, and it's sort of, I view it as race and power intertwined. So, you can, go back to, Supreme Court decision in Dred Scott, where, our highest court in the land said that, a Black man was, very gender specific, doesn't have any rights that a white man is, bound to respect. Through Emmett Till, which was, wasn't in the first instance police action, but was a private mob, which ties us into what happened in Central Park. It doesn't have to be the police directly. It could be someone kind of, a private actor enlisting the police or doing police-like activities. It is all intertwined, but I say race and power because, we have seen over the years, and I've been involved in cases over the years, with Black police officers too. And so it's deeply embedded, right? This perception that the use of force to control Black bodies and the way it is used by the power structure. And I just wanted to note that sometimes that involves Black police officers too doing it.
So I want to you mentioned the Central Park incident here that happened in Manhattan here in New York. And there's definitely a connection, right, between the George Floyd murder and the phone call by Amy Cooper on the Black man, Christian Cooper, no relation, obviously, when she called the police and said that her life was being threatened. Can you draw that correlation for me?
Sure, she knew exactly what she was doing, right? I don't know which award it is, whether it's an Oscar or an Emmy, but the sort of the fake weepiness, the saying, this is an African-American man threatening me. By the way, I love the use of African-American by the threats. Like, I'm going to use this politically correct term, while I'm in the middle of debasing and basically insulting all Black people. But yeah, they're intertwined, and we've seen it time and time again. Again, I guess Emmett Till is a good example with sort of the enlisting a private mob to come to the quote rescue of a white woman, and so it's intertwined. That she knew the type of police response that would come to sort of a threatening African American man call. And good that it did not happen there, that he left the scene, but we could very well be talking about a very different outcome had they come in response to that call. So I think they're really connected. And some people say, well, Christian Cooper's alive. I actually listed him in an article I wrote the other day with the names of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. And someone said, well, he's still alive. Why'd you list him? Because it's all connected, and he's by force of circumstance. He's alive, but the same underlying conduct is leading to these outcomes, and we need to talk about them in an integrated way and not in this sort of episodic, one to another. This is connective tissue, and we need to diagnose it as a whole.
I mean, essentially, that phone call was a threat. It was the use of her power over him to call the police and label him in a threatening way. That's a threat to his life.
No doubt about it, and it's a threat. And it's dangerous. I've called on the district attorney to bring charges because it's a threat, it's dangerous, and it's also unlawful, right? So to call and make that kind of fake claim could lead to the danger we're just talking about, and that's why it's a crime, and we should be deterring that type of conduct. So I think there should be a prosecution there. Others have said, well, she's lost her job, she's had Twitter shame, but I don't think we can privatize justice. We need to be determined this conduct. And there's so many more examples, right? The Black women who were playing golf, quote, too slowly. The young a Black girl who was selling water, 8 years old, I believe, without a permit. And a white woman called the police on her. We've got to, we have to, the government has a responsibility, not just those responding on Twitter. We can sort of, the government has a responsibility to use government power to address these ills.
I believe State Senator Brian Benjamin has called for this kind of false 911 call, hate-based false 911 call to be made illegal.
Yes, he has a bill. I think he introduced, within the last week, which would enhance what is already on the books. I think that the district attorney has the power to bring the charge under the current law, but obviously anything that makes it clearer would be welcome.
So I want to talk, you wrote a really interesting article in the Medium, I believe, about called Black People at Risk Every Moment of the Day. And I don't know how we police something like that. There is no way to change that dynamic legally. What were some of your thoughts that you wanted to bring forward when you wrote that article?
First and foremost, it was cathartic for me. I mean, I've been spending a lot of time talking to my two children, 10 years old and 14-year-old. On Sunday, I met with the sort of Sunday school. I'm a Sunday school teacher at my church. And so the pain of seeing, children live through what we have lived through and experiencing it through their eyes, we need to be thinking about next steps so that they're not having the same conversations with their kids in 20 years. And so wanted to one, share that pain, because I think it's important to just articulate it. It was important for me personally, and to share it with those around me, and to connect all of the various incidents so that we're not talking about them separately. I thought was important, but also, at the end was sort of a, call to action that we've, many of us have been doing this for years, and, there's a fatigue that comes with it, and we have to acknowledge that and take care of ourselves. But there's also, we have to continue to push. And so I said, we need all of the above approach. We need to protest, we need to sue, we need to prosecute. We definitely need to get out and vote. We've got primaries coming here in New York. And then obviously we've got the presidential, in addition to Congress. We got to do the census, understandably because of COVID-19. I think our numbers are down in New York. We're experiencing a lot, but we need to do all of the above. And in particular, someone who's been in government and seeking government office, running for district attorney. I think those in leadership positions in government, there are just very specific things that need to be done. We need independent, reviews of this. We see now the Attorney General was appointed in Minnesota. We need something like that. That's just, that's how we do it. We're not going to have someone who works day in, day out with the police, investigate a murder by a police officer. We're not going to do it. We need to sort of have that in the law. We've got an executive order in New York, but it needs to be law. We need to be proactive. The legislature, I was encouraged, looks like they're going to move on New York Civil Rights Law 50A, which is a law which provides undue protection to police officers' personnel records. We saw in the Garner matter with former Officer Pantaleo. We see it now here in Minnesota. Officers have histories, and if we can know these histories and flag them of prior discipline and complaints, we might be able to prevent incidents, right? So law enforcement needs to be, we need a law there, but we also need proactive from our district attorneys to be putting officers on lists where we're not going to call you as a witness if there's been a finding that you lied, or we're going to scrutinize who we're using to do these cases and have early flags. I mean, that's within the power of a district attorney. So I think, transparency, independence are key. And then I also think that our criminal justice footprint's got to get smaller. We have to, minimize maybe the wrong word, but we need to have fewer interactions. You look at the stop and frisk numbers at the height. And when I was in the Attorney General's office, we did a report showing that, only 0.1% of the many arrests, many stop and frisk resulted in a conviction for violent crime. So all these stops, all this sort of, human cost for, really no law enforcement benefit. So we need to, not have those sort of interactions, because those interactions can lead, they're not productive, right? They can lead to bad outcomes in terms of police use of force, and they don't produce anything in terms of making us safer. We ask that question in everything we do, and does this make us safer? So I'd say transparency, independence, and within transparency, looking at the records of police officers in 50A and having an early warning system, and then we need to look more broadly at our system. Not have these interactions or stop and frisk, or more recently, social distancing enforcement, right? We were having that conversation 2 weeks ago. That now feels like that was months ago. Why do we have police, on the front lines of a public health emergency? And we saw the kind of excessive force, that doesn't make us safer. So that's got to be part of the conversation too. Not just the fatalities, but the interactions that are not productive, that don't make us safer. And on the other side of that, there can be productive non-policing interactions, between police and particularly our youth. Many of us are involved. I've done things through my church that get law enforcement together with youth that are not in a policing context. The research shows that those sort of interactions lead to better outcomes. And it's not just the police. Our district attorneys need to be out in the communities. We shouldn't be seeing our leaders, our law enforcement leaders, just in this reactive state. Should be proactive. The discussion about public health and public safety has got to be a proactive one.
So first of all, you were part of a special unit that investigated police involved killings for many years at the AG's office, right? And I read that you said that you believe that in the George Floyd case that the officer was undercharged. And I want to talk about that with you. What does that mean, undercharged?
I think people were they saw the video and they said, we need accountability, and he was charged, but oftentimes many people, prosecutors, lawyers, and non-prosecutors, lawyers, jurors, can look at conduct and trying to figure out what is the appropriate crime to charge is really the first decision. So is it going to be, just to sort of use a broad range of if I push you, that may be a sort of an assault, but if you have certain types of injury as a result, that may be a higher charge that lead to more penalties. And murder, the sort of homicide statutes, anytime a life ends as a result of conduct, and there's a charge, it's, under the broad umbrella of homicide. And there's several gradations of different types of homicides that can be charged. On the lower end of the homicide, spectrum, here in New York, for example, if I'm negligent, if I do something I don't know sort of a risk, but I create a harm, I don't really know how, what this particular firecracker is going to do, and I set it off and someone dies. Perhaps if the circumstances, warrant it, that could be a criminally negligent homicide.
So they're claiming that the intent was not the intent that others perceive it to be.
Right. So the way it's charged, and the reason I say it's undercharged, it is charged as an unintentional act. It is charged as basically depraved indifference. Something that like was bad, but I didn't intend the result. And then when I look at
despite the fact that you hear him saying, "I can't breathe," despite the fact that he was using something that was an illegal hold, despite all that, they're claiming that it was unintentional.
Right, that's the charge. And I think there are many things. You hit a couple of them. One, Mr. Floyd was in handcuffs, right? He was already restrained. Two, the length of time, and this is unlike a lot of other police cases where there's, they call it a split-second decision. This was 8-9 minutes of no decision making, right? He's just literally applying force for approximately 9 minutes. So he's in handcuffs. The length of time, you have untrained civilians imploring, so literally in real time saying, "You are killing this man." So you can't really say, "Well, it didn't cross my mind. I didn't know what I was doing." You're being told.
And other officers standing there, not acting at all as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I that's why I said I think it's undercharged. Now we got a new prosecutor and the attorney general, and I would not be surprised if, at various steps you can be charged initially, but then the charges can be changed, when there's an indictment, when there's a grand jury or later stage of the case. So I would not be surprised, and I think it would be the correct thing to, increase the charge to an intentional murder charge.
And obviously this brings up a lot of resentment and a lot of anger in the Black community. And there have been protests, and there have been many allies that have walked the streets of New York and many other cities, and in Minneapolis, obviously. And the protests have been alongside looting. And it really reminds me, 30 years ago when Rodney King was beaten to the inch of his life in 91, I believe, and then in 92 when the acquittals came and there was a rioting. I mean, what can we reflect on and say, has anything changed? And does this course of action really prove to have any effect?
I think that's why you see the anger. That's why I've spent much of the last week angry. I mean, a couple of years before Rodney King, I had my first time I was stopped at gunpoint. And so that was sort of started my, personal awareness that Black people are at risk every moment of every day. Then, in college during Rodney King, helping to lead, student protests. And then I've spent much of the last 20 years, really trying to push this boulder up a hill, and it feels like it's at the bottom of the hill, right? That progress, while we'd like to think there was some, really, if we're still seeing what we saw in Minnesota, or really even in Central Park, it is hard to be encouraged. And so that I've spent the last week, feeling that way. And I think so many others have. And it really wasn't until, Sunday, sort of, my day of worship with the children of my church, where I sort of was like, no, we got to pick ourselves back up. And we got to continue to fight in all the ways we have. It is, difficult in this moment to feel like, there were sort of any gains. And I think we have to redouble the efforts, right? We got to keep protesting. We have to keep suing. We have to keep prosecuting. And then I think it does fundamentally, we need new leadership. You have to have the diagnosis right, in order to have the right cure. So, calling it what it is, this sort of connective tissue of racism and power that runs throughout the history of our country. I think we must do that. That's got to be the starting point. I think some of these things, while they're all incremental, right? Like none of them is the panacea. they're all still important, right? So we repeal 50A, we get the special prosecutor law, we continue to sort of protest and talk about this all comes from this kind of race power interaction. We have to keep doing all of it, right? Every single piece of it, and then hopefully it leads to real change. We got to do it all.
Alvin Bragg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Joining me now is State Senator Robert Jackson, who had a vigil this week on police brutality. Welcome, Senator Jackson. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I want to just really talk to you about the vigil that you held. Talk to me about the genesis of that, how it happened. I know it happened really quickly, and what you were trying to achieve.
Basically, what came about was we were going to hold a vigil in regards to police brutality, more focusing on what has occurred. But we wanted to be inclusive of all of Northern Manhattan. So the determination was made to have two, one at Fort Tryon Park on the lawn, right prior to coming to the Cloisters Museum of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and then up in Inwood Hill. And basically, we had moments of silence, holding up signs. And then we had elected public officials that spoke. And who spoke at these? We had Congressmember Adriana Espaillat. We had Borough President Gail Brewer. We had State Assembly member Carmen De La Rosa, who represents the 72nd Assembly District. We had City Council member Mark Levine, who represents part of the Upper West Side and Washington Heights. And we had Edonis Rodriguez, who represents Washington Heights and Inwood. So these are some of the representatives that spoke about the conditions, I guess, of the whole police brutality and what have you. And they've given examples. I gave the example that I, as a Black man, have basically felt racism my entire life. We read the names of about 35 individuals that were killed or murdered as a result of police brutality. And we were not only talking about the New York City Police Department, but police departments all over. So basically that was it, hundreds of people. So in my opinion, the totality of the two vigils against police brutality was over 1,500 people. And so many people came up to myself and my staff and thanked us for having that, because it gave them the opportunity to be a part of hopefully what the change is going to be about. And then when I said to the group that the state Senate discussed for several hours repealing 50A, there was a loud applause about that. 50A is a law that basically the police department has used to basically shield the police records where they may have been involved in domestic disputes, or they may have been involved in shootings. They may have been involved in abuse in their authority, where civilian complaints have been filed against them, and where the cities have settled on the city's behalf. So those records will be shielded from public view. And that's why Jamal Bailey, who is a state senator from Northeast Bronx, representing Co-op City in that area, he has put forward a bill to repeal totally 58. There are several bills for us to reform it. So for example, if you're a police officer yourself, right, and you were involved in some activities, and so NYPD is going to use whatever they have to determine whether or not you should be promoted or not. Or if in fact you're brought up on charges for something, let's say you abused someone and they determined that was valid, they're going to look at your whole record to determine what is the penalty. That transparency will give everyone the knowledge about, you know, how violent I have been as a police officer in serving the people. If in fact, you know, there's allegations and the city has settled 5 cases that I've been involved with, hello, that's a red flag right then and there. And so basically that's what we are discussing. And the governor, as you may have heard a couple of days ago, he said that the legislature passes a bill on police reform, he will sign it immediately. That's what he said. So that's what he said. One thing is what you say, and another thing is what you do. We know that. So Bill de Blasio, our mayor, basically said that that the state legislature and the governor should repeal 50A immediately. Now, wait a minute. Repealing for de Blasio and the governor is saying reform. And that's a difference.
That's a nuance, yeah.
So that's what we're dealing with when I say we, the state Senate and the state assembly. And as you know, and I'll say this for all of your viewers and the listeners, that both the Senate and assembly have to come up with the same bill and pass it in order to give it to the governor in order to sign into law. So right now, we're trying to be in sync with one another. And I don't know exactly where that is right now, but I do know that we, the state Senate, discussed 50A specifically for about 2.5 to 3 hours the other day. And we've discussed some other bills, and now we have to, as they say, talk is cheap. The people want action. And I think that even the PBA and other police organizations knows that things must be done, not only in New York City, but around this country. And one reason for that is the highest uniformed police officer, these 4 stars, I forgot his name, in New York City, with protesters, they took a knee.
I know.
And they gave each other hugs. And he said that I and these police officers, we work for you. And so the attitude has clearly shifted. And some people may say, wait a minute, no, it's never shifted. It's always been good. No, the attitude has shifted. They're not going to accept bad behavior from some of the police officers where it's going to reflect negative on everyone. And I totally agree with them. Just like I, as a legislator, if someone is arrested for bribery or misappropriating money and they're arrested and convicted, it looks bad on everyone. So that's what we want to change the culture and get away from systemic racism. And that's what it's about. That's what my vigil was about as far as the goal and objective. And so now people are more in sync with what needs to be done.
I mean, there's definitely an obvious correlation between the relationship between Black Americans and Blacks in New York City and people of color in New York City and the race relations in this country. And what would your advice be to somebody who's dealing with this in their life or in their community directly? Different communities in New York City have this problem on different leveling degrees, right? So what would be your advice? What are the options?
I think that instead of saying, well, it's not happening in my backyard, that's happening in Brooklyn, or that's happening upstate, it's not happening here. They should know that it happens everywhere and to be aware of it. And especially if you're a person of color, you need to be aware of it. And especially if you are an adult and you have children, and especially young Black or brown males, we need to educate our children how to act and behave when they're stopped by the police.
The talk, right? The talk.
Yeah. So I've been stopped driving as an elected public official because I was speeding. And so and at night I've been pulled over and the light is shining a minute before the officer came to me. Light where I is coming off my mirror, I can't hardly see. I had to shift my mirror. Both of my hands on the steering wheel. When the officer came up to the window, I rolled down the window. How you doing, officer? How can I help you? Can I see your license and registration? I said, I'm going to get it now. So they're watching. So in essence, we have to make sure that we, obviously, if I'm speeding, I know that I'm doing something wrong. And then behave by communicating effectively and not yelling or starting to do and stuff like that, because we don't At nighttime, they don't know what you're going for. So how to behave and when you're stopped by the police, and to try to be respectful for them and expect to respect from NYPD. And that's extremely important, that they must behave appropriately. And if they're not, we have an obligation to report it once we leave that environment, via the Civilian Complaint Review Board, via your elected public officials, verbally on the phone, email, or in writing, if in fact that police officer behaved inappropriately. That's how we're going to correct it.
I want to finish up with this thought here and ask you what your thoughts are on this. I mean, there many people drew a connection between the George Floyd, his death, his murder, and Christian Cooper, who, nothing per se happened to him with the police, but when a woman called the police on him. Do you see this as using the police as a threat towards somebody? Do you see any action happening there?
And watching the video and what have you, and reading the news on that, it's called white privilege. The way she communicated, she was basically saying that a black man is threatening her and come now. And so I believe the report said when the police arrived, he was not there. Mm-hmm. So she was the only one there. If in fact they arrived and he was there, they may have gone up to him and handcuffed him. And this is where the systemic racism comes into effect,
right? Because
they're seeing this is a black man, and this is a white woman who called the police that she's being threatened. Basically, what he said is that the sign is right there. Your dogs need to be on the leash. I'm asking you, miss, put it on the leash. And so we need to be aware that the police are going to look at us differently with respect to their internalized racism, that they may not think that they're racist. Is inherent in our upbringing in this society. James Brown, I've said it even on the floor of the New York State Senate when we were celebrating Black History Month. But on the floor of the State Senate and celebrating Black History Month, I said, say it loud. I'm Black and I'm proud. And I am. I am proud of who I am as an individual, that I grew up in New York City, growing up poor with a family of 9 and on social services, I guess helped me to be the person that I am today. So, and all I'm trying to do is to best represent the people in my district. And mind you, I share with you, what is the makeup of my district? The 31st Senatorial District from Marble Hill, all of Inwood, almost all of Washington Heights. I go into West Harlem. I go parts of Columbia University, Upper West Side, Midtown, Madison Square Garden is in my district. I go down to 26th Street and 9th Avenue in a project. It's 45% Caucasian, in essence white, 40% Latinx, with the majority of the Latinx people, Dominican, and about 12% Black, with maybe 1 or 2 others. That's the makeup of my district. And so that's who I represent. But I represent everybody. As I said, we're all brothers and sisters of the human race, and that we must act like that in what we do. So that's who I am, and that's what I'm about.
As a Black woman and a proud Black woman, I thank you for your service and for talking to us today about this.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching this special edition of Represent NYC and the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. We'd like to leave you with 8 minutes and 46 seconds worth of footage that was shot over this last 7 days here in New York of the protests going on in New York City. Stay safe, stay healthy.
name? What's your name?
Let him go! Let him go! Let him go! Let him go!
Keep walking! Keep walking! Keep walking!
Stop looking at this like it's an African American problem. This is a problem of humanity. This is a problem of humanity. If the police force, if those who we have entrusted power with to take care of us are capable of ending my life because of the color of my skin, then you will not be safe from it because you are also different from them.
United we stand! United we stand!
We are the ones that are toiling in these streets and in the houses of Congress and at City Hall.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! I go to school every day and I come out of school scared that I might not make it home to my family. It's painful. It hurts.
NYPD! NYPD! No peace! No peace!
Do you want to be here every day? Yeah. Do you want to do this every day? Yeah.
it moving. Keep it moving. Let's go.
Heavy on that.
Take your bike off the road.
Sisters and brothers of mine, tired of us dying, tired of the cops lying.
How did it get so bad? How did we get so low? I know where I was going, but now I don't know where to go. Let me hear y'all say, baby, 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 baby. I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe.